name is Chester Klier. I was at the 386 Bomb Group, flying it with both the 8th and the 9th Air Force out of England. I first entered the service in St. Paul. I enlisted in Fort Snelling, Minnesota. I went down to Shepherd Field and went through the A&M mechanic school down there. And about first part of December of 1942, they came around asking if anybody would like to volunteer to go to aerial gunnery school, and mechanic graduates would become flight engineers on any number of types of bombers that we were using at that time. So I signed up for it and passed the flight physical all right. And a couple of weeks later, we graduated and we were put on a train and headed for Baltimore. We were assigned to the Glen L. Martin factory. We'd spend the morning hours in the classroom studying the aircraft and its functions and malfunctions. And then we'd spend the afternoon in the factory, usually going from major station assemblies, maybe wing build-up or fuselage detailing and cockpit installation of instruments and radio gear. And one day we spent in the engine makeup department where they were putting accessories on and then mating all these major components to the aircraft. And the last place we went, as far as the factory was concerned, was the paint shop. And it was pretty smelly in there with a two-tone paint job. They put the gray on the bottom and a sort of olive drab sandpaper finish painting on top. And then the last 2 weeks we were there, they took us out on the flight line, and they had a early Marauder model there that they would put bugs in for us, and we'd go out there and try to pre-flight this thing, and they would do different things to it, that it wouldn't start or it would quit after it started and this sort of thing. And so we had quite a time out there running that up. And I remember it was very nervous sitting in that seat facing that big pile of sand they had out in front of that airplane, and that thing was really quivering there, and you sit there with your feet on the brake pedals running at full throttle, and it made you a bit nervous. So when we left there then, I went down to aerial gunnery school down at Buckingham Field in Florida near Fort Myers. And we trained down there on the Martin upper turret and the handheld guns. And after that, I was assigned to Barksdale Field in just outside of Shreveport, Louisiana. We took our crew training down there. I remember my first flight was a late evening flight, and I was sitting there at the navigator's table. The regular crew engineer was up with the pilot, and I was sitting back there, and they started their takeoff run. He was standing between the two seats, so I just looked out that right-hand window. And it was a kind of a frightening sight at first when that manifold turned orangey white. I thought that engine caught on fire or something, but I found out later that just wide open cowl flaps and standard procedure on takeoff. It was a very, very nice evening flight. It was nice, smooth air. And we came back and landed, and they asked me what I thought about it. And I had a couple more dual flights with this engineer, and then I was on my own from then on. And about 2 weeks after that, I was assigned to a regular flight crew. Our pilot was Donald E. Vincent from Commonwealth, Wisconsin, so he was practically a neighbor of mine, being from St. Paul, Minnesota. And we had a tail gunner from Jim Wilkie from California. Our radio man was from Chicago, and our bombardier was from North Dakota. So we trained. I believe we only dropped one bomb higher than 10,000 feet, and that was the rest of it was all low-level stuff, strafing on the strafing range down there, and skip bombing into brush piles and that kind of stuff. So we went through 2 phases down there at Barksdale, and then we were assigned our own airplane. We were assigned a brand new airplane, and we more or less took it on a shakedown cruise, put a few hours on it, and find out if there's anything that needed adjustment. In the meantime, we'd go down to the Gulf, and we'd bolt one of these ammunition boxes together and throw it out the waste window from a low level, and then it would float out there in the water, and we'd circle around it. Tail guns could shoot at it, and waste guns, and the turret, if the pilot could get it up a little bit steep. And we came back from one of these missions, and the pilot complained that he was having a little trouble with left rudder. He said, it seems to be binding. He says, we got to look this over. And that particular day, our regular co-pilot was off with an ear infection, so we got a new guy to fly with us. And he came back and says, I want to fly the turret. And I asked him if he understood the mechanism and the function of it. And he said, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. So he got up there and fired off maybe 150, 200 rounds. And he went back up to his co-pilot position, and we returned to Barksdale. Well, we made our landing, and the pilot mentioned this fact about the rudder binding. So I was first one out of the airplane. I walked back and looked at the rudder, and it looked like somebody had peeled a banana horizontally there on the aft end of our vertical fin, about just below the number. And holy smokes, what happened? Somebody must have been firing near us, and it skipped off the water and hit our rudder. So then I thought better of it, and I climbed up on the airplane, and I called to the tail gunner. I says, would you get down inside and disconnect the clutches on the turret? I want to try something. So he disengaged it, and I got up on the top there, and I lifted up the gun barrel and swung the turret around so it lined up with the fin, and there was a neat little hole through the leading edge of the de-icer boot, and that, of course, lined up with the rupture I saw on the back side. And that's what was digging into the leading edge of the rudder. When the pilot tried to turn left, it was gouging into this thing. So there was a bit of a hassle of how this was going to be taken care of. They were going to fix the fin one day, and then they were going to take the fin off and give us a new one. And after about 10 days of this, we got our airplane back, and actually what they did, they repaired it. So then we flew it over the northern route. We took off from Barksdale, and this was about, I'd say, third week in June of 1943. And we flew to Hunterfield, Georgia, where they installed a left Bombay tank, and we took on some more survival gear and things of that nature. And then from there we start hop-skipping up the East Coast. We went up to Washington, D.C., and stayed overnight there. And then we went up to Westover Field, Massachusetts, overnight, and then on up to Presque Isle, Maine. And it was pretty rainy weather up there, and I think we were there a couple of days. And then off to Goose Bay, Labrador, and we got weathered in up there for about 4 days. And finally we took off for Greenland. And I would say we were probably an hour out of, on our way into Greenland, probably an hour out. And there was a commotion up in the cockpit. And I heard the pilot arguing with our co-pilot, and he says, get CP up here. They always called me by my first two initials. So I went up there, I says, what's the trouble? He says, look at that temperature gauge. He says, it's going into the orange. He says, I got the cowl flaps and the oil cooler shutter wide open. He says, and it's still going up. And I kind of glanced around the instruments a little bit, and I said, shut everything up. I says, close up the cowl flaps, and close your oil cooler shutters. And he says, it's too damn hot already. I says, you're congealing. I says, the oil is congealing. I says, that the cold air is going through that oil cooler shutter, and it's getting like sludge. So he looked at the co-pilot, and the co-pilot nodded, and he says, I told you. And he says, okay, close those damn flaps. So he did, and we, all three of us, sat there looking at those instruments, and about 2 minutes later, it was back from the red into the orange, and it was getting well down into the green, and after about 5 minutes, it was perfectly normal. So that's sort of thing that can happen up there. And we learned later that a similar thing happened to another crew, and their engine actually froze up, and they tried to dump their gear out, and they opened the bomb bay, and it got wedged in the doors and wouldn't get out. They couldn't close the doors, and they were steadily losing altitude, and finally they bellied in. And one of the pilots in the squadron, the name of Ben Oslin, was in radio contact with this pilot. And this pilot was quite upset. He says, I just bought these pants yesterday in the PX. He says, they're going to get wet. That's the last thing he heard the pilot say. And that we never heard another trace of the airplane after that. So they were lost somewhere between Iceland, or between Greenland and on the Iceland flight. Well, we ended up over in